Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Collards
and Curry podcast.
I am with your host, Colleen Alexander.
And this is my co-host, Pierre Quinn, my husband. You said this time?
Yeah. I mean, I'm your husband.
You're not my co-host?
You're hosting the Collards and Curry podcast. So apparently I am your co-host. All right, so let's just kind of rock with that.
Yeah.
And here on the podcast, if this is your first time hanging out with us, joining us, I want to say thank you. Hopefully this will not be your last time here on our podcast. We talk about
3 things, right?
What are the 3?
Fun, focus, or mental health, and faith.
And for the context of this conversation, we're going to look at the aspects of fun, focus, and faith that are related to our journey as a pastoral family. So this is gonna be good, I think.
At least parts of the journey.
At least parts of the journey.
There's so much we could share.
We can't do it all in 29 minutes. And I don't know, depending on how this conversation goes, we might have to do a part 1 or part 2, depending on the direction that it goes. So hopefully you subscribed to the podcast on Buzzsprout or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to podcasts, or even on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell.
Yeah, people have been telling me they didn't see the new episode, so I told them to.
Yeah, you got to subscribe. You got to hit the notification bell. You got to get all this stuff so that when we release new episodes, you can be one of the first to know. All right, so let's jump into this conversation about our journey as a pastoral family. Okay.
You ready for this conversation?
It's been a long time coming. We said we were going to talk about this for a bit now.
Yeah.
So I guess, no time like the present. So let's dive in.
Yeah. So what would you say was fun for you?
Fun. So I love people and I love traveling.
Yeah.
So an aspect of being a pastoral family that I enjoyed were the times where you got invited to speak other places besides your church.
Yeah.
And we would literally travel across the country, going to different states, even going to different countries. We got a chance to go to Bermuda and do some work there.
Yeah.
So the travel aspect and meeting new people, traveling to different places, I don't really, I like to move. I like to get around. That's why COVID has been crazy for me.
Yeah. I would say meeting new people too was one of my favorites. Kind of getting to know people's story and, their journeys through life, which is kind of why I got into counseling psychology. So
you saying pastoral ministry made you go into counseling psychology?
Well, I just, learning about different people's lives and stuff, seeing how we're all impacted some way with some type of trauma in our life. I wanted to help.
Yeah.
And even within my own family, it kind of, was leading me down that path.
So maybe we should give the folks a little bit of context. I mean, we dove, into the deep end, talking about the fun elements of pastoral ministry as a family for us, or even individually. Let's give them some context on like the journey, like the quick Cliff Notes version of the journey.
Okay.
So
you gonna do that?
You want me to do that?
You could start. Well, I mean, it really started. You want to start in Maryland?
It started in Maryland.
Yeah, we were in Maryland because you were working.
Yeah, I was working for an organization called ADRA International, and ADRA International for our denomination, the Adventist denomination, is the humanitarian arm of the organization that does nonprofit relief work around the world.
Yeah. And
I was working in communications. I was, fundraising, donor development. I got a trip to Ethiopia that was really cool. And, it was that job after finishing grad school, after finishing my master's in communication, it was this job that I thought was going to be really the springboard to an incredible career in communications. And we were, hanging out. We had good salary working out here in Maryland. And that's where we were.
What made you leave the job then?
Man, something about the job just wasn't it. Like, it just wasn't it. It just, I don't know if it was because we all worked in cubicles and nobody saw each other out unless you got up from your cubicle. I don't know if that was it.
I think it's because, it could be that you're a people person and you like to interact. So being in a cubicle, I don't think
mesh
well with your personality.
I don't know if it's that, when we see humanitarian and relief efforts on TV, that 90% of the work that happens in the organization is not that.
Yeah.
It is administrative. It is meetings. So it could have been that, or just, part of me feels like it just wasn't the spot for me it just wasn't the spot. So it was kind of weird. Sleep was not a thing.
I remember that there were nights, quite a few nights you couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
And I was like, babe, are you going to finally make the decision?
Yeah, and the decision was to go to the seminary. There have been people for the longest time, ever since I was a little kid, saying that, pastoral ministry was the thing for me. And part of me I was fighting against. I think we throw that toward young people all the time. Well, at least in a black church, like, let's be completely honest. If you're a male growing up in a black church and you can speak well, people automatically assume that you're going to be a preacher.
Yeah.
And I think that's just due to our exposure to speaking from the pulpit as opposed to speaking in other places. So we just drop that on people, which I think is unfair. Like, you don't give space for people to kind of investigate and see. And
discover what else. Yeah.
Because there are people. I remember first day of seminary, professor was like, some of y'all need to go home because you're not supposed to be here.
Could that be part of, I guess, being a part of a denomination that your outlook is only that big?
Yeah, it's kind of myopic in a sense. And this idea that to do anything outside of this is not real ministry or noble enough or remarkable enough.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who, the big, whatever, 3 or 5 professions, doctors, lawyers, engineers, whatever. There are people who work in those fields, but because of how things have been shaped by our religious culture, are still itching to be pastors.
Yeah.
Because that seems like we've made it seem like that's more noble work than, their career or calling in a different area. So
why do you think that is? Why the emphasis on pastoring like that?
I would say control.
Because many times you hear people talk about your calling to be a pastor, and I think it's like, at least for me, in whatever career, you're called to be that individual. So to be a counselor, I'm called to help people in that way. But many times within the church space, we only see it as pastoral ministry.
Well, we directly connect this idea of calling to, preaching somewhere. I'm called by God with a message to carry. Yeah, and that message might be helping people fix their computers.
Yeah.
It might be repairing bicycles or helping, babies get well in the hospital. Like all of those distinctly. And I know Jordan Rayner in his book Master of One talks about this. Like this calling is not something that's limited to church in any nature.
Yeah.
But I think because of control, I think because of hierarchy too.
Culture, I think.
Like culture, says
you're set at this level, you're not gonna move from that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we put pastors at a certain level.
Which is interesting for our denominational framework. This wrestling with calling to be a pastor, you can become an administrator, which is so far from actual pastoral ministry. But you can become an administrator and people will not say you've left your calling. But if you leave congregational leadership and go do something else, administrative, you've left your calling. So it's control, culture, fear. I think all of those are in there. So for us, I was pushing back against that. And eventually we went back to school, back to seminary, 3 years there.
At Andrews,
At Andrews University, Berrien Springs, Michigan. Home of the baguette, de France sandwich.
And you got to shout out Caitlin's
shout out Caitlin. Shout out Mindy at Caitlin's.
Delicious
Caitlin's
food.
Catering in Berrien Springs, Michigan. We spent 3 years there.
Yeah.
And then we went to Bowling Green, Kentucky. And we started off with one church.
Ended up with how many?
Ended up with...
At one point in time.
At one point, there was a limbo period where we had 4.
4 churches on paper, yeah.
Yeah, that was real crazy. We won't talk about that in this episode. That's a whole series.
Yeah.
And then we went from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and all the churches in that region to Maryland. Mm-hmm. And we pastored here in Maryland for 3 years, and then ultimately felt that it was time.
Yeah.
Not just felt it was time. Like, it was some supernatural stuff there.
To ministry in a different way.
Ministry, I tell people all the time, my ministry is in the marketplace with people, many of which would never walk into a church, but need to hear messages of hope and healing in much the same way. So yeah.
So that was, I guess, a quick overview of...
Yeah, because what we're gonna have to do is come back, put the tea kettle on, and we can talk about some of the tea. Yeah, of what it's like. Being
Not specifics, but lessons we've learned along the way. Yeah. So what's next? Our focus.
All right, so let's talk.
Yeah.
Wait, we talked about the fun. Right?
We did, meeting new people, traveling.
I got to throw this in. We got to throw this in real quick. We got this game. The game we used to play when we would travel as a family sometimes, and even when I was a student pastor going through seminary, this little game, it was unwritten. I don't know if we even knew we were officially playing a game.
I think after a while we did.
The game was, guess what they're going to serve us for potluck.
Boy, oh boy, the experiences we've had.
I think the times where I've prayed most intently, like most intensely in my life, is right before the food comes out at potluck at a random church I've never been to. Like, I'm praying, like I'm weeping and pleading the blood of Jesus, because I don't know what's about to come out of these pans.
And everybody gonna be looking at you.
And it's the funniest thing?
What?
When people would be like, "Oh, Pastor, I cooked a new dish.
Oh, boy.
I've never cooked before. Make sure you get some."
We've had that before.
And I'm like, listen,
come try my chili.
There are rules, y'all. The same rules for Thanksgiving apply when you have people at your church, particularly guests.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, there are rules. Only people who can cook, and Thanksgiving is not the time for new dishes. Church potluck is not the time for new dishes,
so go ahead and buy that cake from the store.
Buy that Intimates cake. Buy that Stouffer's lasagna.
Even though I hate that. But I'll take it over.
Yeah. Matter of fact, go to the Chinese restaurant.
Yeah.
You can get
the fried rice.
You can get the fried rice.
A friend of us taught us that.
Yeah, you can get the fried rice without the MSG. You can get it without egg if you don't rock with egg. You can get it without meat if you don't rock with meat. You can go to Chipotle and get the beans, okay?
Yeah.
You don't have to make it
to do it, yeah.
in order for it to be a contribution. So y'all killing us out here. So here's what's gonna happen. This is what our thing, right? If your food is trash, I'll probably eat a plate.
Yeah, you would. I'll take something. I'll take some salad. I'll take a roll, and depending on what the meat looks like.
Depending on what it looks like. You might move it around in the plate. Mm-hmm. Right. Now
move from one side to the next.
Now we go drink the juice.
Yeah.
If the juice is good, and usually juice is store bought in a lot of places, so we're going to drink the juice.
We've had some experiences with juice too, though.
We've had some bitter juice.
Where it's like people do some kind of weird punch.
Get off.
Mess up a punch.
Get off Pinterest trying to get church punch recipes, y'all. Here's what's not going to happen. My kids are not going to eat your food.
No.
If the food is, and I've been in places, and I got to a place, babe, where I was like, I'm just not embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed that and they'd be like, hey, do your daughters want to play?
They don't want it?
No. It's trash. You know it's trash. And as a matter of fact, your family's not even eating it.
I know.
So why are you pining that off on us?
The craziest thing used to be when, we ate, some of us,
Me.
And it was time to leave, and they would be like,
they would pack up all, listen, that's
leftovers.
a telltale sign. If you
don't want to take it home,
if the people in the kitchen are not fighting over the leftovers to take home,
yeah,
and you have a copious amount of leftovers to give to the guest pastor and his family, your food is trash.
Yeah. You know what I like about this? I think it's going to be freeing for some of our friends that are still in ministry and suffering. It's
Don't eat it.
Well, at least for some time now, we've been away from church.
They in Zoom church, so they good.
Yeah, they're good right now.
Listen, if the food is terrible, I'm going to eat it. Colleen's going to eat maybe a salad and a roll and some juice. My kids are not going to eat it. Mm-hmm. And due to inconveniencing us, we're going to get food when we leave your place.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because my ox is in a ditch and it's your fault that it's there.
Really big.
Like everybody knows you got guests coming, you invite the best.
So what do you say to that?
What?
But Pastor, this is our best.
Lies. Because I know people at home on social media, you be seeing their food at home, and it is good. Don't bring that mess into the church.
You know, then you go into the whole fight over the kitchen in the churches.
That's a different.
That's a whole different.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, we'll have to come back and talk about some of those issues. But
you know who they had. Okay.
But that's some of the struggles, though. Why we deal with these issues.
You know who they should have had at the Capitol?
Well.
Them ladies who run the kitchen at the church with nobody. With nobody.
You get in the line.
With nobody had got up in there if they was at the door.
Nope.
But I think this is going to be freeing because for some people, and I know we talked about like the blessing of COVID, and I know that's a touchy subject for people in our last episode.
Yeah.
Go back and listen to our previous episode, Strangers in the Night. I thought it was pretty hilarious. I think for this quarantine distancing thing, a lot of families, pastoral families, are relieved that they don't have to eat bad potluck.
Yeah. And just the overall rush, I would say, on Sabbath mornings.
Yeah.
It's just weight.
It's a weight.
Yeah, remove.
It's a weight because we're conditioned, you got to start early morning prayer at 8:30 and then you got to start Bible study at 9.
Let's not get into
okay, sorry.
That's our other episode.
Okay.
We're going to talk about some of the issues we were confronted with.
Yeah. So we talked about the fun stuff. Man, we're halfway through this conversation.
Yeah.
Sheesh. Let's do the focus piece.
So our focus piece, what do you think? I would say having a safe space for our family.
I don't think a lot of people understand this. Mm-hmm. This is a job. Okay, people, it's not a job, it's a calling. Okay, whatever. This is a job that a lot of people take home. Mm-hmm. And there's this intense amount of interest in the life and movement of the pastor and his family or her family.
I don't get it, but
I think sometimes doing that allows us not to focus on what's actually going on in our families to some respect.
You think so? I think it has a lot to do with culture. I think for our context, we don't realize that we've been conditioned where we have come out from different denominations. And so we try to treat the pastor and his family as somewhat God's substitute.
Okay, we're not going into like pagan Christianity, which is a book that I've been reading. But if you look at it, it is like a demigod.
Yeah. Even the term when they would refer, which I always hated, the whole shepherdess thing. I never felt comfortable. Now, I know there are people who like that, but for me personally, I never.
Right. Depending on your denominational affiliation, some of these terms don't bother you and you actually embrace them. And that's okay. We're not knocking anyone's church or church journey. We're just, giving you some insight from ours. And one of the things that really, was tough for me, and it's still tough when I think about church in general, is the hierarchy.
Yeah.
The hierarchy of, and when I think about it, in the hierarchy, the pastor is not really on depending on your faith tradition, not really on top.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a shared pinnacle of the mountain.
Yeah. The pastor, at least in our context, doesn't really have autonomy to make certain decisions.
It's almost like the church, and then like in the org chart, a line goes off to the side, and there's like the pastor. It's really weird. It's really unique. But this hierarchy of, the elders in the church, and then the deacons in the church, and then the other officers, and then the people who give the most money to the church, and then the people who have been at the church the longest.
Founders, yeah.
Yeah, and then like the super talented folk, and then like the elite folk that everybody wants to be. Like, it's a weird hierarchy, and people go up and down the hierarchy, and people want to be in. Like,
there's always a struggle there, yeah.
And clubs, and it's.
You see a lot of politics come into play.
A lot of politics.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, what are we politicking for? Like, for what? Like what do you really get out of that?
Well, we were talking about this the last time. I think it's a sense of wanting to belong. And so we act crazy at times in our push to get that.
As a tension there for me, though, because I've seen in spaces and in how many churches, 4 or 5 churches that we've worked with over the years, you see people who want to belong but don't necessarily want to be known.
Yeah.
Like, I want to feel like I fit in, but I don't want to be vulnerable enough to share who I am and my story, my journey, my questions, and a sense of authenticity that's necessary for relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe people, I think going back to the safe space thing, I don't think not just pastoral families, but congregants don't feel safe.
Well, yeah, oftentimes I would say we show up to church with a little avatar in front of us. Well, this is the me I'm going to let you interact with today.
Yeah.
I'm going to say happy Sabbath and do all the right things, but the real me, I'm going to hold back.
Yeah. Real me, I drop the real me off at the door, and then I pick them up on the way out.
Yeah. Especially for pastoral families, you never feel safe.
I think part of not feeling safe has to do with the competition element. That is apparent in a lot of denominational circles.
Yeah.
For us, there are only a handful of what we consider to be big churches. And in our context, big ain't big. It is schmedium, right? By big church, it's like 500 plus is a big church. So there are a lot of small. Most churches in America, regardless of denomination, are less than 99 people. So, for us, there's a lot of small churches. There are a handful of medium churches and a drizzling of quote unquote large churches. And sometimes people are made to feel you don't have any value as a pastor as long as you're in a small spot. So small means you just started and you don't know what you're doing. You're getting old and you need to keep a check because you don't have enough for retirement, or you messed up and you're in a recovery plan, or your external gifts, primarily of preaching, were never that great, so you never got a chance at a bigger spot.
But then when you look at that competition, what is it that's driving that? If you were to be honest, what would you say is behind that?
I was going to say slavery, but I don't know if I should have said that word.
I was going to say, I would say slavery in the sense of chasing the dollar.
I would say, organizational, we talked about this before, organizational systems theory, where a system wants to maintain an equilibrium.
Yes.
And the equilibrium is maintained by having a choice number of top positions, a handful of medium positions, and then the greater majority of your people at the bottom grasping for something that most of them over the course of their career will never be able to attain. And that energy.
So that's like the rat race then.
It is. It's a job.
Yeah.
It's it's organizational structure. It's
So how do you, I mean, for pastoral families, you said it's a job, but for many people, they see it as this very spiritual, you're a spiritual leader, but they see it as it's driven by spirituality. And in many cases, it isn't.
It's not. Just because you pray before you have a meeting doesn't mean that meeting is
the Holy Spirit is leading.
You prayed. Okay, you prayed as a preliminary, and then you went ahead and did.
Because then you deal with the human agenda.
Oh, of course,
always comes into play.
Always comes into play.
And for pastoral families, we see a lot of that with the different moves that families have to deal with often.
I was taking a doctoral class, and I studied the Methodist Church and the fallout of moving Methodist church pastors. Mm-hmm. And it's very similar to what happens in our Adventist construct.
I would think.
The devastation of moving a family.
Yeah.
Like everybody's grieving now. The church is grieving. The family's grieving. The church they're going to is grieving because they lost somebody. And it makes it hard to have a true sense of what's called psychological safety. Like you just don't feel safe because you think at any moment's notice, things could shift on you.
Yeah. And just think, I mean, you can't fully establish healthy relationships if, first of all, you don't feel like you could trust the people, and then you're moved away, probably within 2 years sometimes?
Anywhere from 2 to 5. Mm-hmm. And then vice versa. The congregation feels like, well,
you deserted us.
If you do well, you're going to leave. Mm-hmm. So why should we
Why should we even get attached to you?
Yeah.
We've definitely experienced that.
Yeah. So it makes it hard to find like people you can trust, places where you can be vulnerable, where you can share your journey. It goes to the competition piece as well.
Yeah.
Like if somebody knows a little something about you, when it's time for decisions to be made, they're not necessarily coming to your support or benefit. They're leveraging that information because they're trying to get one of those sprinkling of places at the top.
So what would you say for pastoral families? What advice would you give to pastoral families?
Everybody should go to therapy.
I would agree.
And I ain't talking about talking to another pastor unless that pastor is trained as a therapist.
Yeah.
So if you're a pastor, stop counseling people if you're not a therapist.
If you're not trained to do that.
Even if you are a therapist, stop counseling people. It's too much.
Yeah. And at least within your church, I would say don't do
handful. Do the premarital thing. I always told people I do like premarital counseling, but don't just stop because it's too much. It's too much to carry on one person. You can add people to your team to do that and their resources, but then go to listen, y'all. Even if you feel like you have a great family and a great marriage and great children, all y'all need to go.
Because definitely we were going to talk about one of the things was feeling isolated.
Yeah,
as a family, like there's no one you can be real with because you're always being judged for something.
Always being judged, always being evaluated, and don't let like a move or transition take place and people are like, how did this person get to go there versus there? It's really it can be psychologically unsafe if you don't have a space. And you got to have friends outside of the context of the ministry too, of pastoral ministry that you can be yourself with and be real with and talk through the journey with. Because it's tough, and I've seen too many people lose themselves, lose their sanity. Too many
families fall apart,
Families break apart all because a family didn't feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So.
Listen, man, we're just getting warm with this conversation.
I know.
So we're going to definitely have to do a part 2.
We didn't even get to the faith part.
We didn't get to the faith part.
So,
faith is a very important element.
Yes.
Because for us, even though we're no longer a traditional congregational leading family.
Still doing ministry
and still persons of faith. So we definitely want to talk about that in the next podcast episode. So yeah, you're going to have to
tune in for the next episode.
And maybe on the next episode, Colleen will let me host because I'm the real host.
Babe, you talked most of the time this time, but I was letting you do it. I know you needed to talk.
Okay. All right. We're going to put that on Instagram, who talks the most and on these podcast episodes. We're going to find out. We're going to put that in a poll. All right.
Okay. All right.
So we'll see y'all next time.
All right, guys. Take care and be safe.